Hello everyone, welcome to the last presentation of day one here at the Maxon booth. Hi everybody. Oh, hi. Got a lot of fans today. All right. Welcome to the Maxon booth. I'm Matthias, aka Major VFX on all the socials, showcasing Maxon 1, Cinema 4D, ZBrush, all the major tools in the Maxon suite, and how you can use that to create whatever reality you want to design. So to my left is a man of many talents and skills, and he's just going to showcase just a small fraction of those. So get ready for it. The one, the only. Put your hands together for John Jags knee.
I'm very excited to be here. I am a big nerd that has just never left video games, playing too much World of Warcraft. So I'm just going to get started with my reel and sort of narrate all over it, because I feel like I should provide some extra context. So I do a lot of work in the board game, tabletop, hobby gaming space. That includes board games. I've worked with the company Ultra Pro. They make the sleeves for Magic the Gathering. I've done a couple tabletop miniature games, Kickstarter videos. I've done a couple of video game Kickstarter videos. It's kind of just all over the place. I've not officially worked with any of the big crazy licenses like Marvel or Wizards of the Coast, but I work with a lot of the board game companies and hobby companies that create board games around that stuff. So I just dove into Cinema 4D and Unreal Engine in 2020 because I was just tired of having to wait for super long renders. And I use Cinema 4D and Unreal Engine in conjunction to make stuff for my clients. A lot of the time, the turnaround is super fast, which is why I use real-time rendering. So, like I said, I work with a lot of miniature game experiences, and pretty much I'm going to be covering taking content from Cinema 4D, the little things that you might get hung up on trying to get your content into Unreal Engine. So, all that to say, my latest project I worked on was a game called Love Letter featuring the Bridgerton license, and it was basically a sort of explainer video, and doing an explainer video in full 3D would be very expensive and time consuming, but because Unreal Engine is awesome, we could do it in real time. Now, to be respectful of my clients, the board game companies, I can't officially show like all their licensed art, so we're gonna take a step to a tabletop experience. We're gonna pretend we are a dungeon master, and our party has walked into a room, they see treasure and a dragon, and they need to defeat this dragon and claim their quest reward. So we're gonna do that in Cinema 4D and Unreal Engine, so everyone roll initiative. Getting started with that, I do need to say one thing. It does require a process, and I take a lot of principles from game development, and game development starts with asset creation. You use ZBrush a lot, and some 3D DCC. I use Cinema 4D because that's what I got started with, and it's really easy to do card flipping animation and stuff in Cinema 4D and Mograph. I'll do all my set design, lighting, and rendering in Unreal, and then I'll do all the processing, editing, compositing, delivery in DaVinci Resolve, and After Effects. So, hero asset creation for video games. Last thing I want to share is this is an axe that I created with lots of different software because I'm pretty much learning everything, primarily ZBrush, and this was all manual, hand-done retopology to get the quality that you need from it. And it looks really good, or I think it looks good because everything was handcrafted. In Unreal Engine, video game engines are built for that pipeline. If you try and do some cheaty, hacky things, you might get results that you're not necessarily excited about. What does that mean? If you were here for Winbush's presentation earlier today, UVs are one of the most important things that you need for Unreal Engine game development. So you need good UVs, and when it comes to board games and card games, the text needs to be legible. So thank you to my client, Stoneblade Entertainment. They did allow me to showcase some of their cards, and with this, if I hold Shift and double click on this, the UV tag here, the little checkerboard, this is basically giving me the distribution of my UVs. What I really like about the Cinema 4D UV editing tool is that it has multiple algorithms for automatic UVs. I have found that it is the most favorable for getting the least amount of distortion on products specifically, so like boxes, bottles, cards, dice, etc. So basically my workflow for like a card, for example, where we can just take this and flip it over, there is no distortion on it, and we can check that by going to our textures tab and our UV map. And if we scroll in on this card, we have all of our distribution of these squares very even. They're not stretched. There may be a little stretching, I can't really tell, but UV unwrapping is still a very annoying, complex thing. So you do have to be very conscious of that. Now, when it comes to UVs and board games, you also need dice. And if you are familiar with the tabletop space, you have sharp dice, which are the super collectible ones that are really expensive and really nice. The ones that if you step on, you'd be very unhappy with. And again, it's the same principle. We have a very even UV distribution. Now, the reason why this is important is because if I or anyone were to try and take a custom dice from some board game and they wanted to get the little pips on it, you would have to sculpt each of those manually. And that is an absolute nightmare, and most of the time, not worth the time. So let me just open up a quick demo scene of another dice that I've been working on, a little magical dice set that features some runes, very much in like a World of Warcraft style. And if I can find it, here it is. We have a D20, the classic dice that you use for tabletop RPGs, and there's no indentations on the dice. Let's go back to my standard mode. Let's jump into my Redshift render view, and we will dock it in the viewport, and we can see if we hit the IPR. Hopefully it'll load fast. I also work on a much faster desktop, so I kind of go faster than the computer can think sometimes, and I'm moving around windows. Okay, cool. Now we have the dice, but it still kind of looks gross. The reason why is it's still super flat. Now, if we look at the UV, because we have the distribution of these tiles all even, and we have a flat projection for each UV space, if we go into our UV, or our Redshift tab, go to Geometry, and we add our tessellation override, we're going to create that depth on this dice without any actual sculpting of the dice once it loads. Come on. And I'm asking it to add a lot of subdivisions to this dice. It will go. And while this loads, I'm just going to open up Unreal and showcase another part of the Unreal workflow that I do like, and that is the dice that I typically use for all of my projects. It's very much the same dice. Let's see, it should be this one right here. Let's go ahead and set the scale to like 100, 100, 100. This is a huge dice now, but we can see that it has displacement on it. You can do displacement in real time in Unreal. It does bake it down into the geometry, but if we go back to Redshift, there we go. There's the dice, and we have those indentations on those runes. So if you had a custom dice set that had custom faces, you would do that in something called Substance Painter. You'd create a displacement map to give you that detail. If you're coming to my presentation on Wednesday, I'm showing a little bit more of that process of getting something painted from ZBrush. So stay tuned for that. But long story short, UVs and textures, displacement is all very important, and this now begs the question, why don't I just use Cinema 4D, or why don't I just use Unreal? Well, if I scroll down to my notes, what renderer should you use? It depends. If I have a client that comes to me that says, we need super high texture fidelity, we have translucent materials, we have an emphasis on simulations or volumes, and we have super tight macro detail shots, I will probably do that in Redshift, because translucency in Unreal is possible, but if you're doing it in real time, it's a 2D effect that doesn't quite look as good. You're going to get some weird artifacts. But if you have an opaque dice, we're okay with the content looking a little bit like a video game engine, and I will admit, a lot of my stuff kind of looks like a video game. Then I will do it in Unreal. So all that is to say, UVs, textures are incredibly important. The Substance workflow is very valuable for that. Last thing I should mention is that in Unreal, none of these dice that I have, or we're back in Cinema rather, let's turn off the IPR, none of the content I have here is subdivided. So obviously we have our subdivision modifier here, and when we render, we'll add more subdivisions. You don't have that in Unreal, so you need to bake all of that information down. If we take a look at these dice on the far left of my viewport, if I hit ND on the keyboard, they turn black. And the reason why they're turning black is there is a ton of geometry here, but it works fine in Unreal because sometimes Unreal can be a little magic, but you have to feed it the right information. I like to use the analogy that Unreal is kind of like a 5-year-old toddler that only eats chicken nuggets, and if you feed it anything else, it's going to be very unhappy. So do your best to try feeding Unreal chicken nuggets. All that is to say, prop creation. So another reason why I love using Cinema 4D for a lot of my assets is prop creation. While I am effectively just using rectangles and D20s, D6s, the cloner in Cinema 4D allows me to create very aesthetically pleasing fans of cards or little dice piles. So let me just open up that file really quick. And I have a little demo scene. And let's go ahead and take this cloner right here. And I have these card fans, and I'll just go ahead and remake this really quick. So I'm going to take all of these these cards out of this cloner, and I will set these position to 0, 0, 0, 0, and now it's back at World Center. Let's go ahead and take a look. All of these cards are now stacked on top of each other. If I were doing an animation, I could either do this with the Mograph tools and use the step effector, but the easiest way to get a very easy fan of cards is with a basic cloner. Drop in a cloner, we can select all these cards. Now, if you are familiar with the game Magic the Gathering or almost any other tabletop card game, a hand of cards is about 7. So I will go to the mode, and let's go ahead and get rid of our Redshift render view here. And pull out this window and go to the linear mode. And if we scroll back up, where did my cards go? Why are you down there again? Go here. And then in the linear mode, because I know the standard depth of a traditional playing card is like 0.025 millimeters, I will set this to like 0.03 millimeters. 0.03 millimeters. And now that should offset all the cards just enough so they're not intersecting. Did I type in the wrong number? Oh, maybe 0.03. 0.03 centimeters. Now I also do know 7 cards. And then very conveniently on the X, I can just hold Alt on my keyboard and just slightly offset it like so. And then come out and go ahead, and in the step mode, I can just add a little bit of curve. And now we have a very easy fan of cards that we can use. Now, there's a couple ways to think about your props that you're making in Unreal. You have to ask, am I animating this, or is this just a background object? So the fans of cards sometimes will just be a single fan of cards, and I can just leave it in the back of my frame, and it's just there in the scene to help create the impression that there's 4 players playing the game. But if, let's say, I do have something that actually needs to be animated, I will take this cloner and I will hit C on the keyboard with the cloner, so now I have a parent of this one object, and then I can move this around, but then I could also create an animation with this card, and I can have it pop out just a little bit more. So you really have to ask yourself, is this a hero asset or a prop asset? Now, hands of cards are easy and fun. What about dice? If you have ever played a tabletop game before, like Dungeons & Dragons, you don't have just one set of dice. You have hundreds of little dice. You have the good D20s, and you have a graveyard for the bad D20s. Let's go ahead and take this pile right here. I'm going to undo that and just duplicate it really quick. And I'm going to go ahead and I didn't duplicate that. That's okay. Let's go ahead and find these dice. And I'm going to hit the dreaded C key again. And the C key is basically going to turn all of those cloned instances into actual geometry. It does, for some reason, create a null here. I'm just going to delete those. And now we have these dice. I will middle mouse button click on the parent, and that's going to select all the children. So then from here, I will go to my dynamic place tool, and I will go ahead and dynamic place tool, and then hold shift, hit any property, doesn't matter, and then it will drop. Now, it is slow right now, and I don't necessarily blame the computer. I also hit the wrong button. I'm also running Unreal in the background, so that's totally my fault. I also did select the parent. I'm going to unselect the parent and do the same thing, and that should separate all the dice. Oh, come on, dude. There we go. Now they're all their own individual objects. They're all doing a little roll thing. etc., etc. So I love the dynamic place tool because I don't have to set up a manual simulation for these little dice piles. I can just let the little simulation do its thing, let it resolve. It'll sometimes take a second. And then once that's done, you'll unhold shift. And then from here, we're going to select the parent, middle mouse button click, right click, connect objects plus delete. We're going to go to our tools panel, axis center, and these steps are very important because if we don't have our object at axis center, it is likely going to put your object's axis point in Unreal in a weird, unfavorable spot. So we'll just zero it out so that if we solo this dice pile, that axis center is at the very bottom, so we can just use this as a prop. And then from here, we would make sure that the coordinates of this object is set to 0, 0, and 0. And then I could go ahead and export this out as an FBX. Now, there are a couple little, I don't want to say gotchas, but trying to bake this mesh down into a single object will take a little bit of time if I included the materials with it. So what I do is I will create dummy materials. So I will select this material and then just swap out for just empty Redshift materials, but it's very important that you name everything correctly. So I'll just, one more time, I'll just go through, swap that material out. I do have a couple props I've already brought into Unreal, so let's go back to Unreal really quick. I'm gonna get rid of the environment just so we can see what's happening and zoom in to this little table I have. Now I do have some other dice piles in this Unreal Engine project, and let's see, here we go. And we have all those materials pre-built. So from here, I can just take this object and just drop it in. And now we have a big chunk of dice. And we can just go ahead and duplicate it. And duplicate, oh, come on. And duplicate, and duplicate. And now you have 4 players with all different kinds of dice. Now, the traditional workflow of game development is you actually have to treat each object with respect. You could very well do some crazy redshift, vertex color, user attribute thing to create random colors for dice. But a lot of the time, feed Unreal chicken nuggets. If you want different colors of dice for each one, you would need to create different material selections for each dice, apply those materials. It can get a little annoying, and that is to say that if you were to try and do that in Cinema 4D when you're creating your dice pile, if you have a black dice, for example, and then a red dice, you would duplicate the D4 and call this one the red one. And then you'd make a separate material that would apply to that. All that is to say, if you have your prop finished and made in Cinema 4D, you would go to File, Export Selected Object as, FBX. Once you have all the dummy materials there, you would go ahead and export this. Now, again, sometimes it does take a little long because, again, if we hit ND, there we go. They turn black because look at all that mesh. Look at all that geometry. But you do that because if you want to do displacement in Unreal, like that big dice I showed earlier, you do need to have that much geometry in it. And if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to subdivide, get enough mesh there. So now, I will say that if you go to the modeling mode, there is a subdivision modeling tool, but it's not quite the same as Cinema 4D because it does bake down the subdivision once you apply it. So that is to say, when you're making props in Unreal Engine, it really just comes down to being very strategic. Is it a hero asset, like a fan of cards here, or is it just a dice pile in the background, and it could just live there and imply that some player has 100 different dice, sort of thing. All that is to say, maybe someday we'll get some dynamics in Unreal, and you could do dynamics in Unreal if you've played a video game, but it also takes a lot of time to do the blueprint dynamic stuff. So right now I'm doing it in Cinema. I'll probably end up staying there because when it comes to working with Unreal, you need a 3D DCC. All right, let's talk about animation. So we're going to jump over to some of the animation parts, and when it comes to working with Cinema 4D and Unreal, you do need the Cineware plugin if you want to get your animation as is from Cinema into Unreal. It is part of your Maxon 1 subscription. I literally just Google Maxon 1 Cinema 4D Unreal, and you will find the link. You sign in, you download it, and very conveniently, it just does the work for you. When I started Cinema 4D and Unreal like 4 years ago, you'd have to find the folders and do it all manually, which was kind of annoying, so they fixed that. It's much better. So, awesome. We have this little scene here, and I'm actually going to delete this from my Unreal scene because we're going to go into Cinema 4D and preview one of the animations that I did for my most recent explainer video. Now, as I said, I can't actually show the true card art from the actual cards, so we're just going to play pretend, and I have these cards in this scene that are very much reference objects. The reference card, we have our card backs, etc., etc. So the way this turn works is that if we set up a game, each player gets a reference card, and then in addition to that reference card, they get one card to start with, and then they draw the card on each turn. I animate a lot of board game setup shots. So very much this workflow is just like, okay, what pieces are in the scene? So for example, this little dice pile, I could very well just connect it all at once, or I could keep it separate. Why would I do that? It depends. If I want to do some animation of these little diamonds for this project, I would keep it all separate. But if it's just something in the scene that I don't even need to touch, I could connect all that. Okay, so we have our little Cinema 4D scene animated. Let's go into Unreal and get this there. After you install the plugin, of course, you can go up to extensions, and in the latest version of Cinema 4D, there is this Unreal Direct Link. Now, lately, I typically just use the export to datasmith file, but there is now a direct link sync. This direct link sync will allow you to have Unreal and Cinema 4D talk to each other, but there is another little thing that you need to know. If you don't select the little cog wheel, you're not going to get this little animation button, so you have to select this. When you select that, it will bring over your animation. So make sure we do that. When you click OK, it's going to sync all that and put it into your temp files, so then Unreal can call that data and pull up your card animation. So let's go to my Unreal content browser really quick. And if you're unfamiliar with how Unreal works, it basically creates references of all the content on your hard drive and makes a copy of it that Unreal can actually use. So basically you can think of this window down here as like your, I don't want to say your outliner, it's like your After Effects project bin. So I'm going to delete the practice I was doing earlier, and now we have this empty scene. We don't have any of those data references from the previous project. We go up to the Q plus sign right here, and we're going to go to Datasmith and Direct Link Import. If you do the Datasmith exporter, the actual file, you would select this option, but let's do the direct link, and it's going to find my Cinema 4D project, and we can just hit select. It's now asking us where do we want to save this content. So again, it's going to create copies of all the stuff that's on our hard drive so that Unreal can read it. So we can just drop it into the main content folder here, click OK, and it's also asking us, what do we want to bring in? Sometimes you might not want to bring in your lights, cameras, or something. Typically, you want to bring in everything, but I don't know, maybe you don't want something. So let's go ahead and hit import. Now, what does come into Unreal? A lot of stuff comes into Unreal. A lot of Redshift stuff, materials, lights, cameras, but it's very important to remember that sometimes the values of light intensity in Unreal are different from the way light intensity is calculated in Cinema 4D. So I do use Unreal lighting most of the time, but when I'm doing a project with a client, I will do some temp renders in Redshift just to get the ball rolling. So now, in our content browser down here, it created a new folder for us. So we have our content, and then we have the name of the Cinema 4D project file. And it created all these nice folders for us. It created an animation, which we'll get to in a second. It brought in all the geometry that was in my Cinema 4D scene. So that includes the little diamonds, the cards, this little tablecloth. It brought in the table that was under the table. You don't need the table because the tablecloth is over it, but I did do a simulation to create this actual cloth and brought it into ZBrush and did some cloth sculpting. Anywho, we have all that in Unreal now, but nothing's playing back. And the reason why, this is something that a lot of Cinema 4D artists don't know right off the bat, is you need something called a level sequence. A level sequence is what actually allows you to create your animated content in Unreal. So if we look down here in this level sequence, that little clapboard we clicked on, we now have a timeline. And if we hit the space bar, we hold right click on our mouse and just frame our camera up. I know it's white on white. I will adjust that in a second. That looks a little better for this preview. If I play this back, all the card animation that we did in Cinema 4D is now in Unreal. Awesome. So what's happening under the hood? Basically, if we scroll down in our level sequence here, we can see that it has a keyframe for all the animation now. It bakes it down. So again, this is something that you could do in Cinema, where you could actually take the animation. If we go to my dope sheet over here, we can see that we don't have nearly as many keyframes, because we're actually, if we hit tab, we can see that we have just some nice animation curves. When you bring it into Unreal, it bakes it down. So if I click on this one card, for example, and look at all of my keyframes, there's a keyframe for everything. So it shouldn't change it. Sometimes, though, there are little quirks and bugs, so it's always worth just double checking, making sure that you don't have any keyframes that are just like here for some reason. So just check that. Now, we have our card animation, and the cleanup process of Unreal and Cinema, there's a couple things that are worth addressing. First off, if we look at our level sequence, there's a lot of objects here. And when we look at something in our sequence outliner down here, it's basically referencing something in the outliner up here, which is basically what's in our level. And in this level, we have this deck, which is just this one part, and at these frames, it moves. We can see here with these keyframes. But with the workflow from Cinema 4D into Unreal, it does duplicate things for some reason, and we can see here that there's another track for all of our objects down here, accounting for visibility. And this visibility is just basically saying, do we want to see the object? Turn it on, turn it off. First, I don't know why it does this, but I just type in viz, V-I-S, and then I go to the very top. I select everything. I hold shift and I delete, and then I watch the sequence again because I want to make sure I didn't actually delete anything from my scene. Okay, cool, looks good. It still doesn't look very Unreal-y though. Where's the world, where's the stuff? Well, there's animation that you can do in Cinema 4D or Unreal, and I blend them. Sometimes I will do my animation in all my card animation Cinema and then do my camera animation in Unreal because I don't know what the world is gonna look like yet. So I will take, I have this camera here that's under a couple nulls, and I will just drop it into my level sequence here. So now the camera is off in some weird middle of nowhere spot. Let's go ahead and zero it out so that it is at the very center of this pivot point, and I'm gonna set the rotation 0, 0, and -90. So now if I change the Y value and I pull it back, like so, it's going to be further away. It's effectively Z depth. So now in this pivot, what I can do is I can change this and effectively change the tilt of the camera. The reason why I like doing this is that it allows me to create a really easy camera orbit around my shot. And this is something I would do in Cinema 4D or Unreal, really just depends on the project. Now, here's another thing. It's blurry. What's going on? This is a thing about Cinema 4D and Unreal. It does allow you to bring redshift cameras, but if you don't set your focus point in your redshift camera, by default, if you go to the optical settings of your redshift camera, the focus distance is about 2000. So you're gonna get a blurry look like this. But if we go ahead and hit the eyedropper, we can focus on our scene. And hey, look, now our shot's in focus. We can go ahead and change the Z depth so we're a little bit closer to our scene. Then we can go to our camera rotator here, which is basically a null at the very center, or kind of offset from the table. Go to frame 0. And we will go ahead and add a transform property, go forward in time, add another keyframe, and let's go ahead and rotate this some amount. Select these keyframes, maybe just drag it out a little bit more. And then as we play this animation, we get a cool little orbit. But the scene still looks kind of gross. All right, let's actually do the Unreal thing, which is building a very small environment. So let's go ahead, and in Unreal, we have multiple modes, very similar to Cinema 4D. When you have these modes up here, just like in Unreal Engine, we have these modes here. They're just on the left side instead of the right. We'll go to the landscape mode here, and full transparency, I do use another 3D software called World Creator a lot to create all of my set design. It helps me create large landscape environments without a lot of effort, because sometimes I'm lazy and I don't want to do the sculpting. So we'll get to the sculpting part of landscapes in a second. I'll bring this down, and I'm going to go ahead and import from File. and I'm going to find this object right here. This is a height map for my landscape. If I hit open, it's going to ask, is this a tiled image? It's not. It's just a 2K black and white image. So I'll hit no. And then there's a couple things. Again, Unreal is very persnickety. You have to be very deliberate with some things. So before we get into the actual environment we're doing, I have to quickly reference this number, 16.835, because it's going to ask us how tall do we want this landscape, and the translation into Unreal is not quite as clean. And then I did save a quick little document that is going to tell me the Z height, 4475.7. So I'm going to go here, 4475.7. I do have a YouTube channel, and I do have tutorials. I have a tutorial coming out very soon that covers all the math that's behind this, because it's kind of annoying. Okay, so now we have a landscape, and I did realize my Z pivot was off just by a little bit, but that's okay. We'll fix that in just a second. We'll go to the paint mode now, and let's go to my presentation just to quickly demonstrate. Unreal Engine has the marketplace, which makes it super easy to buy really cheap, affordable assets to create little scenes for the board game project that I use. So I have this stylized forest asset pack from the Unreal Engine marketplace, and I will go to my landscape object here, scroll all the way down to my landscape material. I'm going to go to my content browser. Let's go ahead and bring it up so I can see more here. And I have that stylized forest. And I will go into my materials, drop in the landscape, and drop it right here on the landscape material. It's going to turn white because it doesn't know what data it needs to pull yet. Again, Unreal just being very persnickety. So we can go into the paint mode. We scroll down, and it has a bunch of different layers that we can use. I'm just going to use grass. So let's go ahead and select this layer info right here. And after just 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, there we go. Now we have some grass. I'm going to hold Control L on my keyboard, and I'm going to move my mouse around until the sun is kind of exposing my scene where I need it to be. And now we have this grass scene over this landscape, which makes my life very easy. I realize I made a little bit of a boo-boo though, and I'm piloting the camera that I am currently trying to create this animation around. So I'm just going to go ahead and zero this out one more time. 0, 0, 0, -90. So now we should be looking at the table, but where's the table? Like I said, I did mess up the exposure, or the height just a little bit. I think it was actually 17.84. Is that going to fix it? There we go, yeah. I got the number wrong. I remember doing my practice runs. We're going to leave the camera. So go here, or not. We don't want to zero that property out. Oh, come on. All right, so we're going to get the camera just a little bit closer to the scene, and then we'll just zero that out, and then zero out these two guys right here. So now, if we go back to our level sequencer, we have our little orbit around the scene. I'm going to go ahead and set this cloth to some other material. Did I make my solid color? Solid color, sure. So just so it's a little bit easier to see our white cards on the scene. And now we have a little orbit. Let's go ahead and try and make this a little bit more cinematic. And the cheaty, easiest way to make something feel more epic than it is add depth of field. So we can do that very easily in real time by getting the camera just a little bit closer, because the Unreal Engine camera does feel very much like a true cinema camera. Let's go ahead and adjust our focus distance here. And now the background looks a little blurry, but it just looks like a green fuzz noise. Now, to dress up this scene even more, that stylized forest doesn't just come with the landscape, it also came with all the extra bells and whistles of the grass in the scene. So in the foliage mode here, I can go ahead and select all of these little grass objects, and I can just paint some stuff around. And I can take multiple approaches. I can only dress up the scene based on what the camera sees, which, okay, cool. And if we play this back, oh, we need to add a little bit of grass over here. And then we can just make sure that we are adding a little bit of extra detail in the background just to make it feel a little bit more exciting. Now, I could also take the other approach, and this is typically the game development workflow, where I want to be able to see and move my camera anywhere I want. So the way you would do that is you would go ahead and leave your camera, and you would zoom out. Let's go back to the foliage mode and paint around in a circle. And then let's say we just wanted a bunch of trees, and we'll just go and use that asset pack we will select those trees, we'll make the brush size really big, zoom out, come way far out, and add a bunch of trees around the scene, just like that. And then we can go back into our camera right here, and now we're getting a little bit of shadow in it from those trees that are around the scene. And it's gonna help make it feel like a little environment. And the benefit about this is I can now take this camera rotator and let's say, oh, I didn't like this camera angle. I wanna actually shift it 180 degrees. So I'll just delete these keyframes and then go back to frame 0. And let's find that property. Let's set this to, let's say, 180 or 180. And now we have a completely different camera angle, but that basically we just built around it. So we can basically move our camera almost wherever we want. If I go ahead and add a second camera here, let's go ahead and pilot that camera by leaving this one, pilot the new camera, look through the camera, and then we can hold right click and use WASD. If you're familiar with the game World of Warcraft, it is very much like flying a flying mount. So we can just move around, create a new composition for our scene, and then we can go ahead and change our depth of field, go here, change our focus distance, and now our main asset stuff is in focus. So that's basically my workflow. I know this was very rudimentary from the whole world building perspective, using World Creator, creating foliage, adding a landscape. So let's level this up a little bit. Let's go through the actual process of rendering, and I'm gonna go back to that Dungeons and Dragons tabletop scene that I was mentioning earlier. So let's go ahead and open up that scene, open project, Cinema 4D, D&D demo scene. I have this shot right here. And now I have something a little bit more detailed. I have more stuff in the scene. My girlfriend's character sheet is here. Her character sheet, or her D&D character is a fighter, and her D&D character name is Vexus. So I have these little character sheets here, and they're just a plane. So bringing assets from board games into Unreal is just very simple objects, just making sure you have enough detail and topology. I also have these minis here that I am using for this project, and if I hit ND on the keyboard, ND, come on. They are very dark, and the reason why is because there's a lot of geometry. So on Wednesday, like I said, I'm covering how to take this geometry and bake it down, or reduce and decimate the model so that you can actually animate this in Cinema 4D without wanting to cry, because it'll take forever if you use a 3D printed model. Now, this scene right here, I have camera animation. I'm gonna go through a little simulation here. So we have our little D&D characters. They're walking into the new dungeon room. They're going to encounter this dragon. The D&D dungeon master says, all right, you find this dragon. He's protecting his horde. It's time for combat. Roll initiative. So in a case like this, one, it's very important to start with your animation animatic, getting some sort of block out of your timing. So you'd maybe get the voiceover saying, all right, everyone roll initiative. So I would make a marker in Cinema 4D for that, and I'm going to scroll all the way over to my dope sheet here. Come on. Dice animation right here. And I'm going to go ahead and trigger this little D20 right here. So if I move over, and sometimes I do get a little disoriented because I am very much used to the Unreal workflow, so sometimes switching between all the different software can be a little confusing. I will admit that, but eventually you do pick up on it. But I have this D20, and I want to roll it and roll initiative so we can initiate combat for the players. So with the simulation tools in Cinema 4D, especially for small objects. First, let's cover that. In the simulation tab, if you hit Control D, you'll get all of your project attributes. And in simulation, you have your scene. Now, for dice rolls, if I were to play this dice simulation at full speed, the dice just falls. It 2 frames. You don't even get to see it. So I set the time scale to 0.2, so it's almost as if I'm shooting in slow motion, so to speak. So in addition to that, I set my scene scale to 0.01 because it's small objects, it's small dice. Most of the time, I would bet you that most 3D simulation is built around human size, like a human holding a can or fire, which is a little bit larger. So I'm definitely pushing the system a little bit because it's very tiny calculations. All that is to say, oh, we should set this back to 0.01. And then we go into the actual object that we want to simulate. We right-click, we go to our simulation tabs, and then we have a rigid body. Rigid body is the hard surface simulation stuff. Now, before I do my simulation, it's important to address a couple things. This table that I have in the scene is from the D&D scene that I'm going to open up in Unreal Engine right now. I should mention, you are not allowed to use Unreal Engine assets and any other 3D rendered software. But it is very important to use it as a reference point so that you can see how big your table is. So I brought the table from Unreal Engine into Cinema 4D just as a reference point. And then in addition to that, I'll create a primitive object that is going to be basically my table collision modifier. Just because the assets that come out of Unreal Engine, they're already triangulated. So they're already doing the fancy Unreal video game engine stuff to get their topology to actually run in real time. I'm hoping this saves fast enough. If not, we will just, oh, there it goes. So because it's the table that was in Unreal is already triangulated, the mesh is just, it's going to be really hard to work with, and I have found that any simulation software is going to fight against this because it doesn't know what to do with the spacing of all this geometry. So, unsolo that, I'll create a little primitive box around the same size as the table. We'll hit NC to get rid of our shaded lines. Let's go to the dice and actually run this simulation. Now, I want this camera, if we take a look at this preview camera here, it's looking at this one character sheet. I want it to land there. Now, I did try, and I remember that the speed was like 200, and this custom initial velocity is saying, okay, we want to push the simulation to move in one specific direction. So this is the positive X, which is going to move this way to the left. And it's going to move at 200 centimeters. So if we go ahead and spit it out, oh, didn't do the thing. Why didn't it do the thing? Undo that. Come on. Maybe I have to go to the very beginning and recache it. Aha, there it goes. Now it's doing the thing, so now it's getting thrown. Awesome. Now, to help bring some extra life to this, first off, I need to trigger the simulation. So I'm going to go to frame 359. Let's just say the voiceover for the video I'm working on, the voiceover starts at this frame. So I'll go ahead and make a keyframe there and then disable it. Go one frame forward by hitting the G key on my keyboard, enable it. And then if I go ahead and hit Shift F to go to the very beginning, you do have to restart the simulation and then jump back to your time. And now we have our little simulation starting over there. Now, a couple more things we need to address. First off, the dice now based on that simulation is not on the table. That's because the rigid body, the Cinema 4D collision simulation tools, if we go under the collision tab, it's creating thickness around this mesh. So I'll set this to 0.1, and it's going to make it much easier to get closer to that table. Sometimes I will clean up the animation just a little bit and move it around just to make sure that it lands on the table. And then I've always just found that the collision shape doing a triangle mesh ends up being a little bit more favorable. Now, the last thing I do when it comes to my little dice animation is I will add a custom initial angular velocity. And I'm just going to put in a random number like 24, I don't know, some random number. And that's basically going to add extra rotation at the beginning of it, because when a dice is coming out of your hand, it doesn't just stay at one initial rotation. It starts to tumble. So now if we hit Shift F to go to the beginning of our timeline, and then we play it back, and then we skip to the very end, we have our dice simulating, it's rolling, getting that end frame, and settling down. Now, let me know in chat what you think it landed on. I am very excited to see what the simulation gave us, and that is a nat 20 live on stream. That's pretty cool. I will take that. All right, so this person is going first in their turn. So all that is to say, this would be everything that I would need to do. I do like the Cinema 4D direct link tool, but I always do a backup simulation just in case. So what I'm gonna go do is take this D20 dice roll, drop it into my dope sheet over here, go to functions and bake objects. Now, at what frame do we wanna bake this? I know it's at 359, so I'll just say 350, so we're not baking the entire sequence, and we're just gonna let it calculate. Now, under the bake function, I did check the box, make a copy, so it's gonna make a duplicate of it. And now we have 2 dice, and I would just do that just to make sure that my 2 dice are, that's weird. Why did it do that? Interesting. Well, we're not gonna troubleshoot that on live stream. Normally that does work, but we have our D20 dice roll and then we have the copy, and the reason why I do that is because I wanna just make sure that I'm feeding Unreal as many little tricks and tools that it would need to calculate all this data, because let's be real, it's calculating a lot of data to handle this. So let's just go ahead and go with this for now. I will troubleshoot that later, but we can go into our extensions again, go to our direct link and go to direct link sync. Let's make sure we hit the cog wheel and make sure we bring over our animation. Click OK. We're gonna let it load. This scene might take a little bit longer because it's bringing in a little bit more stuff. Granted, it's just a very simple dice animation and some camera moves, but let's let it go. And then in Unreal, we have our scene. I'm gonna go ahead and fly around. I have all of these objects here previously from my practice stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and just bring it down. I don't want that stuff anymore. Come on. Oh, Unreal is so happy, or unhappy, because it is, I am pushing this computer to the absolute limit. I'm gonna close After Effects. I didn't cover that earlier, but UVs are very important. Let's go ahead and close that really quick. And again, when you're working with Cinema 4D and Unreal, I do have multiple programs open. Because I'm running on a laptop right now, it is a little slower. Normally it is a little bit more performant, but pushing laptops to its absolute limits is technically not ideal. But, okay, let's bring this into Unreal now. Direct link import. Let's go ahead and make sure that we're pulling from the correct source, which is our D&D demo scene. Let's go ahead and select it. It's going to again ask us, what do we want to bring in and where do we want to bring it? So we'll put it in the content folder. We want to bring in everything. Click OK. Now we just let it do its thing. It's doing a think. We're letting it go. And I'm going to say, over the last couple of updates of the datasmith plugin, it has gotten so much faster. And I remember getting started with it in 2020. It would sometimes take a little bit. I'm very happy with it now. So it did bring in everything from Cinema 4D, but when I come from Cinema 4D into Unreal, I understand that I have to do a little bit of cleanup. So I have that table reference that I mentioned earlier, which is that big cube. Delete. Don't need it. Don't care. We also have that old table that I use for size. I also don't need that, so we can just go ahead and delete it. Don't care. Don't need it. And then I'm going to just find that table mat that I had. And the reason why I am going to bring up the table mat right here is because I typically will do temp textures in Redshift and then bring it over into Unreal and do all my textures again. So then we have our texture shader tree here as well. So it does sometimes require double the work, but rendering in real time also saves me that, so I'm cool with that. Now, let's go back to our content browser. Let's go into the D&D demo scene and that animations tab, and we can go ahead and look at our level sequence. Let's do the same cleanup I mentioned earlier. We'll type VIS. We will get rid of all the visibility objects that we don't need. Come on, I'm scrolling down, I promise. And select everything, delete that. Now, it is going to give us these 4 black frames down here. Those black frames is basically a camera preview. As I mentioned earlier, it's trying to obey the Redshift camera settings, and that does include the exposure. Now, I don't know what is the actual property of it might be this guy right here, but I haven't really played with it, because what you have to do is go into your camera in Unreal, and then you type in the search bar EXP, or exposure. Come on, EXP. And eventually it's going to give me these details in my camera, and we're going to turn off the metering mode, and it's basically going to do auto exposure for your camera. So now our cameras are actually seeing stuff. We can go ahead and find our cameras in our project. Let's type in cam. like so. And we will drop it into the level sequence. If it's not already there, it's already there. So here's a gotcha that a lot of motion designers I found struggle with. I do make some tutorials on YouTube, and people are like, why can't I render my shot? It's because you need this thing called a camera cut track. This is basically like a video editor in Adobe Premiere for your cameras. So with this camera cut track, it's basically saying, what camera are we looking through? So we go ahead and add our camera 1, and now if we go ahead and look through this, we can see that we are now playing through our main camera. Now, okay, what about the second camera? Do I have to render out multiple level sequences? No, thank God. We can just go to wherever we want that cut, and then we can go ahead, hit the plus sign, camera cut 2, and we can go ahead and preview it, and we can see that this camera starts at this frame. So we can just go ahead and change our cut point to right there. So now we have our shot, little orbit right there, and then we cut to there. Now, why is it looking there over something else? Again, sometimes Redshift and Cinema 4D, translating that data is very complicated and is way over my head. So we just have to tell Unreal, what are we looking at? Because in Cinema 4D, I had a target tag on this camera, I need to make sure that I'm looking at the desired target. So cam 002 target. Let's go ahead and under our camera 2 right here, we can find our camera 002 target. And let's go ahead and make sure that's at the right spot. Where is my camera 002 target? Right there. Why is it not working? Is it, where did you go? Come on, leave the camera. Aha, it's right there. So for some reason, it just didn't call that data. So we will just go ahead and find our cam 002. Target. There we go, and that should fix it. And let's go ahead and look through. Come on. All right, well, you know what? Instead, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna find the mini, and fortunately we can just use this little eyedropper, select this actor right here, the little warrior dude, and it's gonna look at the warrior dude instead. Oh, you know what? I have 2 camera 002s in my scene. Got it. So another thing about Unreal that you have to be very conscious of is references. Because Unreal is making a duplicate of all of your assets in your scene, you basically have to say, hey, what are we trying to look at? I realized I didn't bring in that camera 002 target because we already had a camera 002 target in the scene already, so it didn't know which one to make. So let's just go ahead and in camera 002, we'll type in warrior dude, and we'll select warrior dude 2. There we go. Now, it's blurry. What's going on? Again, that camera is very much it's referencing the focus data of the Cinema 4D scene, so we can just go ahead and set that camera, and then we'll go to about right here and set our last camera scene like so. Let's go ahead and go into the camera 03, and we can type in EXP. And I know it's a little dark right now because the scene is a little dark, but we can go ahead and go into our exposure compensation and actually manually drive the brightness of it. And then from here, we can adjust our focus point. Focus, we'll set focus on the dice. And now we have focus on that dice, and we get that little simulation. Now, I'm not sure why the simulation didn't quite work in this version. Normally it does, so that's just a little thing that sometimes that does happen because simulations are hard and challenging. But all that is to say, we have our shot, we have our 3 sequences here, and here's the best part and the end of my presentation. Let's say we're ready to go, we're ready to render this out. Hypothetically, I could dress up the scene way more, and what I would do in this situation is do a lot more. I would really light the scene, I would try and add more stuff maybe, but fortunately because the Unreal Marketplace, we get a lot of really cool assets. This is just another Marketplace asset that I used. For this little background environment, we'll go to the little clapboard right here. We will go to the unsaved config. We will just save a JPEG sequence. That's fine, not a big deal. We will go into a pre-renders folder. We will find somewhere. We will drop this somewhere. Demo 003. We will hit render. We'll hit select folder, hit accept. Hit render, your render preview is going to pop up, and as long as you have the camera cut track, it's going to call all that data, and come on, come on. Oh, now it's going to compile shaders. So once the compile shaders is done, that is just a traditional part of Unreal. It's going to load all the materials in the back end. Because I'm running this on a laptop where I didn't load the files previously, is doing the loading again. But once it does finish, it only has to do this once per project. Once that's done, it will render in real time, bring it in After Effects or DaVinci Resolve, do your editing, and that is basically my entire Unreal Engine workflow summary in a nutshell. Basically, you have to play the game first if you're making a board game video, model, create your UVs, create your props, animate it, build your set, render it, and make some cool stuff. And that's basically my Unreal Engine workflow. How'd I do, Coach?
I don't know. I'm not the biggest judge. The internet, how do you do? 20.
Scale of 1 to 10.
Roll the dice.
Roll the dice. Roll initiative.
Roll initiative for how you did. Any questions for Jags while we have them? Yes. Derek, question. Great question. So he's wondering, how do you edit? Do you edit directly in Unreal, or are you doing sequences, shots? What's your approach?
That really depends on the project. 99% of the time, start with an animatic, especially for like board game videos where there's very complex rules that we have to create a demonstration of. We won't even touch 3D. We will do like very basic sketches to be like, is this dice in the scene? Are these cards in the scene? So then I can block out my timing. And then if we're just worrying about what's in the shot, like what the dice, or we're doing like a beauty shot, sometimes I'll just literally let my Unreal scene go and then position my camera. It really just depends, but animatics, pre-production is super important for Unreal.
Any other questions? He is the last presenter of the day, so he can take them now. If not, we have you another presentation later on this week, right?
Yeah.
When do we got you?
On Wednesday at 10:30 a.m., and I'm going to be covering some of the detailed workflow of getting a ZBrush model into Substance Painter and then into Unreal Engine. But the kicker is we're not going to do the traditional game dev workflow of perfect topology. How can you cheat it and do it faster as a motion designer?
How to cheat in motion design 101. First rule of motion design, cheat. That's it. That's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us day one here at NAB. We will be back tomorrow morning with another amazing lineup of presenters. Let's give yourself a round of applause. Jags, another round of applause. And we will see you tomorrow, Internet. Thanks so much for joining us.